Hello, welcome to this edition of On the Road to Beijing on France 24, a road full of traps for the Olympic torch, a symbol of peace, friendship and hope. That's what the Olympic flame is supposed to be, but it's far from what we've seen this week. Last Sunday, the torch was in London, an important stop in the British capital, which hosts the next Olympic Games in 2012. But after the disruption in Olympia in Greece, when the relay kicked off, new protests were held on the streets of London. Some pro-Tibet demonstrators using extinguisher in an attempt to douse the torch. But the day after in Paris was worse. Take a look at last Monday's incredible chaos.
A relay marred by angry protests. Within minutes of former hurdler Stefan Diagana taking the Olympic torch from the Eiffel Tower, pro-Tibetan demonstrators moved in. A Green Party councillor tried to extinguish the flame and was arrested.
Here's French democracy for you.
If Beijing had hoped the Olympic torch would get a warmer welcome in Paris than it did in London before that, it was bitterly disappointed. Protesters angry at China's crackdown on Tibetan dissidents opposed to its rule upped the ante. 3,000 police lined the 28-kilometre route through the French capital. Their main task, preventing demonstrators from putting out the flame. At the same time, 3 men managed to scale the Eiffel Tower and erect a banner. It depicted the Olympic rings as a chain of handcuffs. Other demonstrators had their Tibetan flags confiscated, leaving some rattled by the police's heavy clampdown.
Instead of exporting democracy, France has adopted the same methods as the world's biggest dictatorship.
To many, the Paris procession of the Olympic torch marked the point when the international relay descended into farce. The torch had to be extinguished up to 4 times by officials, and the flame kept alight in a safety lantern. It was later transported to its final destination by bus. On top of that, a Chinese official had to inform the French authorities the planned half-hour ceremony at Hôtel de Ville was cancelled. A further disruption to an already dismal PR exercise for Beijing.
Joining me now is Yi Liu, Phoenix TV Paris correspondent. Hello and thank you for coming. Can I ask you first of all, as a journalist for a Chinese television, how did you report on these events?
Well, I would say rather than being shocked, I think personally I have to say that I was sad. First of all, sadness because the Olympic flame is a symbol for peace. You know, in the old times when you lit the Olympic flame, all battles, all wars were to stop.
This is a tradition in Greece.
That's right, and we see that in Paris, not only in Paris but elsewhere, the symbol.
And people will also say that it has something to do with repression in Tibet.
Right, okay, but demonstrations and that, but you have a sporting event that has become an instrument that's political and commercial and used by the media. It's shed so much light on this, and everyone has used it as a tool. And at the same time, the fight for human rights has become something that's aggressive. And we also saw a lot of spectators who've become sympathizers with Tibet, Tibetan sympathizers. And I spoke with a lot of people, and in fact, these people do not have enough knowledge about Tibet and what's taken place in the history.
It's difficult to know what's happening in Tibet today.
Certainly, I'm not the one telling you what history is about in China, but many journalists, many reporters and politicians who want to see Tibet freed, you have to know that Tibet is like Corsica for China. It's a Chinese territory and has been since the 13th or 14th century.
Some people question this. You know that journalists, Western journalists who want to go to Tibet can't go. They can't get visas.
Well, the French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, is urging Chinese authorities to talk with the Dalai Lama. The British Prime Minister has said that he won't be going to the opening ceremony, adding that he never had any intention of attending. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon won't be going either because of, quote, scheduling conflicts. Yilyu, do you fear an international boycott?
There needs to be pressure to bring about change, but we have to distinguish exactly what object we're going to use to exert pressure. In fact, what's being used now is are the universal games, the symbol for peace. And for the Chinese people, they certainly can't understand why the Western world is trying to use the Olympic Games as sort of a gift given to the Chinese to make us establish conditions for negotiations. You have to understand the Chinese mindset. Also, human rights is a combat that's been going on for centuries, and you can't expect the Chinese government or the Chinese people to get to the same level after just 30 years, getting to the Western levels after centuries. That's fine.
The Chinese government made a commitment to improve human rights in China. Today we have a feeling they have not respected their commitment.
But that's just a feeling, and you have to look at really what's taking place. You have to look at China compared to 30 years ago and China today.
Thank you very much for coming. And I must point out that we invited the Chinese ambassador to France to talk to us, but he declined the invitation. Meanwhile, the Dalai Lama was on his way to the United States with a stop in Japan. Thursday, he held a press conference and he talked about the Olympics.
We seeking genuine autonomy, not seeking independence. One point I mentioned that. And another point, Olympic Games. Right from the beginning, as I mentioned earlier, right from the beginning, we support the Olympic Games. So these are my main message to the Chinese brothers, sisters, all over the Chinese, and particularly Chinese in mainland China.
For the torch relay, now a focal point for anti-Chinese protesters across the world, the mess isn't over. Take a look at San Francisco.
Just seconds after being lit, the flame was taken through a security cordon and into a warehouse. It re-emerged 45 minutes later, at a point far from the crowds waiting along the official route. It was escorted by police officers on foot, bike, and motorbike. The city's mayor, Gavin Newsom, said the measure was justified to ensure the safety of pro- and anti-Chinese protesters. The organizers did not want a repeat of protests that grabbed headlines during the London and Paris legs of the torch relay. A last-minute decision was taken to change the routes. None of the routes originally scheduled were taken to make sure that no part of the crowds felt targeted.
There are some severe human rights violations going on, and they are being perpetrated by China. So I am here to make sure that my voice is heard, that I am not okay with human rights violations.
The relay was scaled back before the departure to 9.5 kilometers. It was due to go across the Golden Gate Bridge and through Chinatown, but that was scrapped. Pro-Tibetan protesters were not heard, but many say the sense of festivity of the occasion was lost.
After San Francisco, the torch moved to Argentina. Next week, the torch arrives in Africa, then to Oman, to Pakistan, Islamabad, on to India, and finally close to home in Thailand. And that brings us to the end of this program. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with the next leg of On the Road to Beijing on France 24.